Hi, should I get the number right this weekend? Um, Episode 30, it's August the 10th, second weekend of August. The weather today is a little bit dull. Tomorrow, apparently, we're going to have a heat wave, so that should be enjoyable up here. The farmer's field is looking totally different to how it looked last week. The bales of hay have all now looked gone, and he's ploughed the field, so it looks different. So autumn's on its way, maybe. Right, so plan of action this weekend. I do want to get that bell thing back into the cab after having taken the bulkhead down a couple of weeks back. I also want to put some of the white paint around that band that sits outside the bus just above the cab. So as we start to put the bits of the cab back together again, that's also an essential ingredient because the beading that sits on the outside has little bolts that go inside. So I want to get that done now. You may wonder, some of you have not picked up on some of my previous editions of this, why I'm actually putting top coat on things. The reason is that one, I want to help whoever's going to do the repainting on this, so it makes life a little bit easier for them. And secondly, by putting top coat on things, you actually get to see any dents or imperfections in the panel, so I can actually get that right as well. So, yeah, so should we get on with this cab? So I interrupt this bit of the video to say that that was the third take. Unfortunately, each time I did the takes, the camera switched itself off. So the third one I managed to get done in time, but before it decided to switch itself off. So I don't quite know what's going on with my iPhone. So I do apologise. Last week I did loads of filming, and when I got home, either there was only very short clips of about 10 seconds, or I couldn't get them off onto this Archini thing, which is or Archie or whatever it's called, that does the editing. So anyway, hey ho. So apologies for that. So we'll see how we get on this weekend. Hopefully the camera doesn't keep switching itself off. Although, frankly, some of the footage probably wasn't worth showing anyway. Anyway, so let's get going.
Right, I almost forgot to mention a quick shout out to our visitors this week. Mark Davis, Peter Veers, also Peter Figg as well, he popped in for a while, and Nick with his DMS. So, yeah, they kept me entertained for the weekend.
This handle turned out to be an absolute nightmare yesterday. I arrived here at 6 o'clock in the morning and fiddled about with some other bits and pieces, and then started doing this around 7. Now, I know I've said this before, how difficult can it be to do one tiny little thing? It's the little things that take the time. Putting this handle back on took 3 hours. I mean, you can change your Routemaster gearbox in less time than that. Yeah, 3 hours. It's not the fault of the bus, but the pin that holds it in place, which runs through into the cab, it was very tight when I got to take this handle off. And when I sprayed the pole that you can just about see in there, just at the bottom of the shot, obviously that pin got painted a few times. So before I went to put this back on, I actually filed off some of the paint to make it a bit easier to go on. But it was absolutely having none of it. It went so far and then just jammed solid. And it wasn't the paint. I think the actual pin is very slightly bigger than the arm of the little handle thing. As a result of which, I then thought I'd take it off. It wouldn't come off, it wouldn't go forward, it wouldn't go backwards. I hadn't got like a ball splitter, which is what you need for this, but I didn't want to damage all the paintwork around there. But nonetheless, it still got caught, as you can see, by that little bit there, around that mark on the paint. That was when I was using the rubber mallet. But that was 3 hours. I was so pleased when I eventually got that to go in. But if you wonder why progress is slow, there's a very good reason for it.
Lucky for you, or perhaps not, as time in this video will tell, I actually recorded this. So I thought it was going to be a little 5-minute job, and I thought, oh, only a couple of minutes, stick this thing back on. Right, that's the scoop this sits in. And I spent a lot of time paint stripping it, as you can see in the picture. It dates from May of this year. And I really didn't want to damage this. I wanted to make sure that the handle all being nicely painted and the panel all being painted. I didn't want to end up getting it scratched. Now, it's sod's law that some paint, unfortunately, is going to come off when you get such a pig of a job as this. Like I said, if you look at an RT, you think, oh, that's a 5-minute job. And there's many 5-minute jobs that have turned out to be 5-hour jobs. And unfortunately this one, as I said, just wasted 3 hours of my time trying to get the damn thing on. As you can see in the little picture there, it only got that far and it got stuck. There is a little hole in the side, you might have noticed, and that's for a split pin. Split pin obviously is to hold it in place to stop it falling off. There is no way that is ever going to fall off. It really requires some pressure to get it back on. So 3 hours of very hard work. Eventually out come the, well, I'll say small, I was going to say big guns, but they're small guns. Out come the file. I filed it down a little bit to see if I can get some more paint off of it. And just to make it a bit more of a snug fit. But I was determined to get that split pin back in place, and I was also determined to sort of get it finished. It wasn't one of the jobs I was going to walk away and leave. So sadly some of the paint got knocked off, and I caught the rubber mallet, caught the that little scuttle just at the top. So here I am using 2 hammers. Was eventually it became more successful, but 3 hours of sweat, tears and whatever else. So buy yourself an RT, guys. If you want to waste time, here's an ideal project for you. So anyway, this is the final picture. Shows the amount of damage that I managed to do to it. There's the damage on the top there where I knocked the paint off, and then some of the green paint's gone missing, but the split pin is in place. Hurrah! End of this little project, and move on to something else. I tell you what, let's lighten the mood and do something else for a minute. I was going through my collection of bits and pieces. Although this is a little bit scruffy and it's had better days, this is a fair chart with a lovely London Transport roundel on it, the open-ended roundel thing that they had back then. This dates back to 1968 for the 303, which although it's the first stop on here is actually Welwyn Garden City, it did actually start life at Hitchin and then make its way down to New Barnet Station via Hatfield and Potter's Bar. It was one of those main trunk routes which is almost, well, has completely disappeared now. It doesn't exist at all, which is a great shame. But it was a major trunk route that I think it sort of paralleled the railway quite significantly, and it's probably the railway, the improvements in the railways over the years has killed it off. And there's a few other examples of green line services at parallel railways, like things like the 721 that ran out from Aldgate to Brentwood. That was killed off by improvements in the railway. Certainly couldn't compete with today's Elizabeth line. So anyway, so here we are, it's a fare chart. And what the fare chart did, it was downstairs in the lower saloon. Apologies, I haven't got a picture, but I did look through my archive to see if I had a picture of the fare chart holder downstairs. But it was a legal, and probably still is to this day, a legal requirement to have a fare chart on a bus. However, we don't really bother with them now. It's probably a bit like the old thing of the taxi driver having a bale of hay in the back of the car. It's a legal requirement, son, you should have it. But the ticket machine probably suffices nowadays for that. By the way, the bale of hay thing has long been repealed, but nonetheless it was around for quite a few years when we had diesel taxis. So as I said, this fare chart dates to 1968, and it would have been in the inside of the bus. You know, I said I didn't have a picture. Well, the London Transport Museum had a picture, so I had a quick search of their online website thingy. You can do that if you have a look at yourself. There's lots of pictures online there, thousands of them. Here is the interior of an RT, and just by that offside bench seat, you can see where the fare chart used to be. It's a really awkward place because on the back of that fare chart is the, as you may have asked, maybe thought the question, why is it that Hitchin to Welwyn Garden City is not shown on there? Well, that was actually on the flip side of the fare chart. So I suppose the idea was if the bus started from Hitchin or went to Hitchin, the bus conductor would have to change that over at some point. There's a little T-key lock in the top there. You might just see at the corner of the frame. However, they're quite popular seats, those bench seats. I imagine asking someone to move while they flip the fare chart probably didn't happen much in practice. And also looking at that picture, I'm beginning to wonder whether that's Stockwell bus garage. It looks very much like Stockwell. Anyway, let's move on with this fare chart. Right, so here we are, a close-up on the top of the fare chart, the route 303, 303A, so it does 2. Beautiful London Transport roundel. I really do like that, and that lasted. That style, it's a bit like sort of London Transport's way of modernising towards the mid-60s, but that style lasted probably into the 70s. I don't think Routemaster's got it. Someone will point out, yes, they did. But the Daimler fleet lines that came in the end of the 1960s, early 70s, actually got that roundel. They were on the offside panels just below the staircases. I remember them quite well, but certainly RTs didn't get it. They remained with the wording London Transport on the side. Certainly the red ones did. The country ones got all sorts of things on the side. But anyway, yeah, really lovely little roundel that. Someone will talk about the story of the roundel because it's been around even before London Transport Executive or London Transport Board was created in 1933. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but it was certainly around and in use on the railways long before that. Plus, if you go to India, they've nicked it for India as well, so it appears in India. But anyway, it's still around. It's endured, and it's a trademark symbol of London Transport, all that's good of London. Right, so look how harsh that is. Kids travel for free now, providing you've got an Oyster card, although not in this part of the world, you have to pay. But one child under the age of 3 years, so if you had two, if you had twins, you had to pay for one, and must be accompanied by a fare-paying adult or child passenger. I do wonder, do you really have children under 3 years of age travelling on their own? Anyway, never mind. And not occupying a seat. That was another favourite thing as well. They had to sit on their mother or father's lap. Were not allowed to occupy a seat to the exclusion of a fare-paying passenger. Otherwise, the bus conductor had the right to charge. I do remember actually going back to, I don't know, maybe it was 1965, 66 or whenever. Maybe it must have been 65. My mother got on a bus in Chinkford and told the bus conductor that I was under 3, and the bus conductor sort of looked rather puzzled. I'd probably heard it all before, and I turned around and says, "No, I'm 4." At which point my mother had to pay a fare for me. So that was brilliant, wasn't it? I'm sure loads of kids have done that. So anyway, here is the top of the fare chart. Right, for some reason my video editor didn't like the little film I made. I actually filmed it on my iPhone and sort of panned down and panned back up again, but didn't like it, so I have to make do with a photograph I took of it. This is the triangular part of the fare chart, which sets out for the conductor how much you need to pay. So if you was travelling from, say, Welwyn Garden City to the North Orbital Road, wherever that happens to be, the fare is 1 shilling. Now, shillings went out of circulation in 1971 when the UK introduced decimalisation, so that swept all this away. So where it says sort of 1/3, that's 1 shilling and threepence. So the ticket machines, all the ticket machines at London Transport had at the time, had to be changed to make do with these new fares. Anyway, sticking with the fare chart, if you've never seen one of these before, because they're quite rare these days, as I happened to mention earlier on, stage point number 35, which is the very first one at Welwyn Garden City. Bearing in mind the bus could start from Hitchin, so it would have picked up another 34 on its way there. Oh, there's another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the right hand side of the picture, and that is for buses running to Hatfield LT Garage. Anyway, back to the plot. So the stage number would appear on your ticket. So if an inspector got on and found that you'd boarded at, say, Welwyn Garden City, and you'd paid 1 shilling, and you were still on the bus at, say, Potter's Bar, he would know that you've overridden. Hopefully the conductor would have spotted it as well. But anyway, there's some lovely fare stages, because there's not a lot in the country for them to put. So if you have a look there, you've got Signpost to Newgate Street or White's Corner. White's Corner being on the 303A and Signpost to Newgate Street being on the 303 because it's a slightly different route. But yeah, there's one place on there that I know very well. And that's the Rookery, Fair Stage 19. It's actually not in Dixon's Hill Road, it's on the Great North Road, but the Rookery Cafe, you can get a bus in there. So then they do a really nice dinner as well if you want to go in there, or a breakfast, you have a salad or whatever you want. So anyway, that's the triangular part of the fare chart. Right, so and now the bottom part of the fare chart, you've got a couple of little nice bits on there. Look, Hatfield LT Garage to Birchwood Estate. Probably the 303, I would have thought. Someone would know better than me. and Hatfield Technical College, which is another, I think that's the University of Hertfordshire these days. So anyway, there you are. The fares, when you look at 1 shilling is roughly about £1 in 2024. Fares now, maximum fare on this is what, 3 shillings 6. So that would be, I don't know, 12. There were 12 pence to a shilling. So 3 shillings and 6 sixpence would be probably £3.50 in decimal these days. So the maximum fare from Welwyn Garden City to New Barnet was £3.50. On the bottom there you can see the date, 1968, when it was printed. I couldn't see a PE on there, although someone may spot PE if you look at it very closely. Oh yeah, there it is. Potter's Bar, White Horse or the Red Lion, stage 11. So that's a point of entry. Don't know why, someone will tell me more. And there's another one up there, Hatfield Station. So having said I couldn't find them, now I can. Now I've got them in close, zoomed in. Right, so that is a fare chart. Every bus would have had a fare chart. They may well have carried more than one fare chart because buses did swap from route to route at various garages. So yeah, so if a conductor was doing lots of different routes, by rights I suppose they should have a series of fare charts. Now this design of fare chart hung around probably until the end of the 80s. London Transport did away with this when they started doing flat fares, so it really became pointless, frankly. But DMS's, which sort of replaced the RMs and the RTs, or the RTs in the first place and then the RMs, they had a sort of a square, much smaller, sort of just bigger than A3 fare chart, which was placed in a cabinet midships. They also on metros had that, but Titans ended up with it pasted onto a board, sat at the front of the bus where the passengers would have sat. They actually took a space out of there for the driver's ticket machine box. If he didn't need it, he'd put it away in there when he was off on his break. So yeah, so on top of that was a pasted fare chart just like this. But these have now all fallen into disuse. The Route Master, you can tell the difference between a Route Master and an RT one, because the Route Master one's actually a little bit smaller to fit into the space under the staircase. Again, another successful design feature of the Route Master over the RT. As I said before, if you've got a passenger sitting there, the conductor can't change it. And not only that, it's very difficult, I think, for anybody to sit there when someone's sitting there, actually, for someone to come along and actually check to make sure they've been charged the correct fare. All right, so yeah, there was a little Miranda off into memorabilia. I've got a few more of these, and I won't bore you with all of them, but I've probably got about 30 different ones. But as I say, I won't bore you with all of them. But this one I came across, and it's a bit dog-eared, obviously, as you notice, so it's had a bad life. But yeah, and my RT 3461, she probably would have worked that route at some point. Right, I thought it might be useful to look back at where we were this time last year, last August. I'd gone up the barn and I'd had a look at the RT to see what work I needed to do. And I noticed this really tiny little hole in the step riser. And I thought in my infinite wisdom, all we needed to do was to take the back wheels off and put a plate in. So my colleague, Alan Wells, who's our coach maker, I invited him up to the barn to take a look and see what he thought. And Alan said to me, best thing to do is take the floor out, because if I'm going to start welding in there, there's a risk that you're going to set the bus on fire, and that's the last thing I want. So anyway, on Alan's instructions, I started to remove the floor. And to my horror, I found that this little hole in the side of the bus, was the tip of a very big iceberg. The floor had rotted out, and that wheel arch, literally from where you see that pair of clippers to where Alan's doing some welding. So that whole lot had basically rotted away. So we had to have that part of the wheel arch refabricated and then welded in. So that was a little job that I had to do back then. But it does go to show, I mean, I am sort of moving around inside the bus, and I'm trying to make sure that as I go along, each bit's completed. So this is looking a lot better now. It doesn't look like that at all because I put the floor back in. But yeah, so it's miles better now than what it was. So there's a little flick back to August 23. Right, so let's get back to 2024 and this wiring in the cab. There's a hell of a lot of wires that go in here, but this was this weekend's task, is putting these wires back into the Speedo box. As you might be aware if you've watched some of these before, I've actually carefully audited all my wires and I put little numbers on them and stuff like that before I entered them into the conduit. The conduit is a very tight, confined space, and I hadn't really worked out that when I put wires into a tight, confined space with little tabs on them, the tabs come off. So what comes out the other end is about a third of the bits of wire with no tabs on. So I had to work out which wire went where. I've got a little voltmeter that I can connect up. It does a little sort of continuity test, so I can trace wires back. But there was one wire in that conduit that I'd run through, and I couldn't work out what it was. It was coloured orange, and I looked at my index of different colours and stuff like that, and I couldn't identify it. So I had a chat with Mark, who was over the other side, over a cup of coffee, and contemplated, what is this one wire? Well, anyone who's done a little bit of electrical could actually read this diagram, might notice there's one cable that doesn't go into the little block in the cab. There's all the other cables all sort of go in there and they come out from there. But there's one cable that sort of arcs round and goes to the little lamp. And then it comes out of that and then goes to side and tail. And I hadn't really thought about that. So when I did my little diagram, I did all the cables for the my little sort of handwritten diagram, as it were, all the cables and all the relevant colours to the block. And forgot about that one. The Speedo head I knew about anyway, because those two wires are basically just their own. They just go from there to the Speedo generator on the side of the gearbox. So yeah, getting there though, I must admit. There's only another couple of wires to do now in the cab, and they're the two to the windscreen wiper, and they are going to be a piece of cake. My next job then is to take this diagram and then check each wire for continuity to make sure that each wire does what it's supposed to do. And once I've done that, I probably might be able to put some power into the bus and make sure everything works then. So there you are. So that's that little bit. Right, so let's go back to the barn and see how I got on.
You may remember I mentioned it's a bit like a Rubik's Cube, this. On the left-hand side, you'll see the two handles which are used to open the two windows. There's a lower window and an upper window. The one on the left-hand side is the lower window, and the one on the right-hand side is the upper window. Now, I picked the easiest one first, which is a bit of a giveaway not to do, isn't it? So pick the easiest thing to put in. So I started with the left-hand one and then went to put the right-hand one in and found that the left-hand one has to go over the right-hand one. So I ended up having to remove the left-hand one. There's not a problem, there's only 4 screws, it was a piece of cake. But then I ran into a problem, was having fitted these two things back in, that's the Speedo and the heater, just behind the back there, although not visible in this shot, is a wood screw which holds in this mechanism there. So as a result of which I had to take the Speedo box back out again to put that wood screw in. So message I think for the future is to make a note of how I take things out. This is the box, little bit of work to be doing on there today. I've got a series of wires that need to come in through that little hole there. See that hole? Suppose it hasn't got a grommet. Maybe it did, maybe it perished and disappeared. But anyway, that's the Speedo box there. And the heater is in from last week, as you might recall. I had to take that back out again and fiddle around with it. So that's all ready and in. And if we go flick up rather quickly, I don't know if you can capture that. That's what I did yesterday. I finished off with putting the bell circuits in and the buzzer. I've done a slightly neater job, I think, of the wiring to the interrupter unit, which is the box just on the right hand side. The wiring originally, see that little panel just at the top there where it's sort of the conduit goes into it? There was a cut in that conduit, and then the cables then dropped down into the interrupter box, because the interrupter box, the indicators, is a later modification. So what I've done is, I've doubled the wiring, but I've extended the wiring. It now goes all the way through that conduit to there, then runs round the back of the bulkhead with all the other wires, and then pops out there. So I think that's a bit neater than how it was originally. There's so yeah, so there we are. So there's the switch gear is in place. We run round. We've got the lamp I showed you, and I told you a story about that last week. And the stop unit is in, and there's a little bit of piping there which you can just see running across the ceiling. That's kind of just held in place temporarily for the minute. So that's in. So yeah, a fair bit of progress, I'm pleased to say.
Right, a pot of paint and I are never far away. So having done much of the interior of this, there's still some things that go from the outside to the inside of the cab. And if you have a look there, you've got that little line of dots. What they are is they're holes in the top of the window frame which hold the external beading in place. But unlike the rest of the bus, because where you've got beading, it's normally wood screws, so 99% of times that you come across a bit of beading, it's a wood screw. But in this case, it's completely different. What they are is a small sort of machine screw with a cheese head on it. I call them cheese heads. I've been told you can't call them cheese heads. But anyway, they are, as far as I'm concerned. A cheese head, sort of slightly half-rounded head, with a nut on the backside. So yeah, I want to do that before I put the window in. I want to get that in place, but that also means I've got to put the beading on, but then that causes a problem round the side of the bus.
Right, it's Sunday morning. Yesterday I managed to get that white band sprayed up, as you may notice. Now the reason for doing it is to try and highlight if I've got any damage in the panels, and thankfully spraying those panels has actually showed up a little bit of damage on this one, where there's a slight bend in the panel, just about there. I might, actually, if we change the reflection, you can just about see it, look. So these are the original panels. There's another one there as well. As I say, these are the original panels that came off. That one there didn't come off. It was quite stubborn. But that's not too bad. There's a couple of little issues that I need to sort out on it, and I think we'll get that one squared up fairly easily. Right, now, before I put the windows back in, what I want to do is to put the bit of beading back on at the bottom of that panel there. There's the apertures for the windows, and just above that just above the upper driver's screen is a line of machine screws. I like machine screws with nuts on the end. So I need to replace them. And while the window's out, is an absolutely ideal time to do it. However, there is a slight problem. It's a bit like a Rubik's Cube. Down this side, just there, I've already sprayed that panel. That panel's made that sits in there, the white bar. However, I do need to make the beading, and I'm not entirely sure if that piece of wood that runs across where the door fits is absolutely accurate, but I'm going to give it a try today. I'm going to try and make the beading for that without that panel in place, which is going to be interesting to say the least, because I do need to put that back on while the panel is off, panels or the windows are off.
Right, so I made a start on that on Sunday afternoon. I've got to make two. I've got to do one for the top. I should have mentioned that really. I've got one at the top needs to be done and one at the bottom. The one at the bottom is critical because I've got all those holes to line up. If I don't get the holes to line up and it's not done right, then it becomes the top one because it doesn't really matter so much as they are wood screws and they just go randomly into a piece of wood. But there'll only be a few millimetres out, so I don't think anybody would notice it. So doing that one, those two, next weekend. Right, so almost done, and I thought it might be worthwhile just having a look back at the work that I've done over the last sort of few months, which is the whole purpose really of doing this. Here are all the cab bits laying on the floor. Most of that now is back in the cab. There's only a few little items that still need to be sorted out. There's a floor panel there and some other bits and pieces, but basically most of that is now done and back in the cab. So we are getting there, so progress indeed. Right, so here's the front of the bus. Now I know it looks really sad like that, but yeah, it has really come along a bit. The chassis underneath the floor, the cab floor, is now in silver. The woodwork is all back. That white band has been painted so it shows up all the little dents and all the horrors there. You know, yeah, it's certainly some progress. So let's have a look at another picture Right, so I've got a couple of pictures here which take us back to a few months ago when I started to get ready to spray the ceiling in the cab. The guy who owns DM999, Nick, came over and had a look at the sort of current progress, and he said, wow, you must be really pleased with that. And one of the things that I really regret is not paint stripping this, because what I simply did was rub everything down and then blow it over with some black paint. The first black paint was pretty too glossy, and it showed up everything that you just can't see in this shot. I mean, that ceiling, I know you look at it now and it goes a bit of grey and there's a bit of brown and there's a bit of black and everything there. And it does look bad, admittedly, but you think, well, that'll be all right, coat paint will go over that and it will cover any imperfections. Well, no, it didn't. What it actually did was to show it up really badly. And then, of course, I huffed and puffed about it, did some filling, which is in this second picture, and that still didn't improve it. So I ended up having to use a real almost dead matte. Problem with dead matte is it scratches so easily, and while I'm in that cab slinging things around, it's getting damaged, so I'm going to have to go around with a little brush and touch it all up later on. Right, so here's the cab a couple of weeks back, looking all pretty much dishevelled. First coat of brown has gone on the side. The ceiling is in a black. I think that was the final black I used, although it looks quite shiny. I'm actually using a very bright light in there. So yeah, so the first bit of brown is on the side wall. The conduit is going in, and it's, although as I say, it looks a mess. And when you go down there and look at that on a Saturday morning, when you're sort of 6 o'clock in the morning, you think, oh God, I think I might as well go home. But anyway, progress, is getting there. I have to say that, otherwise I'll just give up, I think. Right, so there it is. I mean, looking much, much better now. The turret I've put in place, I'll call it a turret. It's actually the shape of a bulbous horn, if you have a look at it, but there's no hole in the bottom of the floor there. Speedo in, as you well know, heater in. I've put the 2 little clips that hold the handbrake in place. When the handbrake is off, it sits in that little thing. It looks like, I don't know, it's a pelican or something. It looks like, you know what I mean. But ridiculous design on the RT. When you try to get out the cab, the actual handbrake is in the way. So you apply the handbrake and it's there like a barrier. You let it off and it's quite nice. It sits down almost by the Speedo. So it's right out the way. The Routemaster's improved that design and actually shifted it to the side by the engine. So an RT design flaw there. Right, should we give up while the going's good then? Looking forward to doing next week's one. Thanks for sticking with me. Please keep your comments coming, and have a very safe week wherever you are.